Hey, welcome to another tutorial on how to create Dmods. I'm Rob, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at depth queue of sprites. So you want to go File, Open the Dmod that we created, detail the minimap, click on there, and you see the tiles and the person is still there from the previous tutorials. Now in this tutorial we're going to be looking at depth queue of sprites, so we're going to be adding some new sprites. We'll use this screen right here. So press R to make sure you're in sprite mode, and then press E to bring up the sequences page. And we're going to go for sequence 87, which is a table, and frame 9, which is a circular table. Put it down on the map. Now before I get into the depth queue of sprites, what I want to show you is, if you go right click and press properties, you'll see that the Y coordinate is 128. Now, the Y coordinate of sprites is what determines whether the sprite will be drawn on top of other sprites. So, for instance, if we grab another sprite from the sequences page, we'll grab a rock, which is sequence 95, and we put it down here. You can see that the rock is drawn on top of the table. The table is behind the rock. And this is because if you compare the Y coordinates, the Y coordinate of the table is 128. The Y coordinate of the rock is 162. The rock has a higher Y coordinate, so it's automatically drawn on top. Okay, as soon as this rock has a lower Y coordinate, it'll go behind the table. So if we go like this, see, it's behind the table now, because it has a Y coordinate of 122, and the table's Y coordinate is 128. So that's what determines the drawing order of sprites. Now that's good, but let's say we wanted to put something on top of that table. If you go back to the sequences page, and we'll go to sequence 421, and we'll grab a stake, as you can see there. Now if you try to put this on top of the table, it's going to have a lower Y coordinate, so it's going to go behind the table and we won't be able to see it. So the way to fix this is we use depth queue. What you want to do is right click on the stake and press properties, and down here, the depth queue, this will overwrite the Y coordinate. Well, not so much overwrite it, because it'll still be in the same position on the screen, but instead of the Y coordinate determining the order for this sprite, the depth queue will overwrite that and determine the order. So basically, just make sure the depth queue is greater than the table's Y coordinate. So what you do is you right click on here on the table and press properties. The Y coordinate of the table is 130 for me, so I'm going to right click on the stake, and I'm going to set the depth queue to 1 more than the table's Y coordinate, so 131. Now what you'll notice is this is automatically drawn on top of the table, because the stake's depth queue is greater than the table's Y coordinate. So now anything with a Y coordinate of lower than 131 will be drawn under this stake on this screen, because that's what the depth queue is set to. So now you can quite clearly place a stake on the table and it'll work. And that's the concept of a depth queue. It's really simple. Basically just used when you want to override the Y coordinate that determines the drawing position of the sprite on the screen, as you can see. And it's also used for when you want an item to just appear behind everything else. So for instance, let's say you've got a dead body. Now if you walked to that on the map, I'll show you this with a sprite. If you go to sprite, move it there, you can see the rock goes behind that dead body, and so will the player if they walk there. So to fix that, right click on the dead body, press properties, and just put the depth queue to -500, or anything lower than 0 will probably work, but I just do -500 for the hell of it. Press OK, and that will be drawn under everything else. You can just use the background option, but then it can't have a script, so whenever I want anything drawn behind everything else, I just use depth queue. It's easier. So there you go. That is the concept of depth queue. Play around with it. open Windink Edit, play around with sprites and the depth queue, and I'm sure you'll pick it up quite easily. And if you couldn't understand it, I'm sure the concept of it will become clear after you play around with it a bit. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time when I make another video on how to create Dmods. See you later.